Hi everyone, Miss B. Hanley here, and today we're here to talk about the theories of development. Once again, I am a ghost. I apologize. But we're going to be going through some of the basic theories of human development as it relates to education. So let's get started. The first area we want to talk about are the three areas of human development. The first area is physical development, and these are usually categorized into two different developmental skills. The first is gross motor skills. These are types of skills that children learn by picking up a ball, by walking, usually skills that require a large number or a large area of muscle movement. The second categorization is fine motor skills, which are based on smaller muscle movements like picking up a spoon or writing, and usually develop later in a child's life. The second area of development is cognitive development, which is based on brain development, but also on intellectual development. And then the third area is based on social emotional development. And this has to do with a person's self-esteem, their emotions, and their connections to other people. The next area we need to talk about before we move into the actual theories are the principles of development. So there are four basic principles that the theorists that we're going to look at base their theories on. And they're assumed in pretty much all scientific fields. But the first principle is that development is relatively orderly. It happens in a sequence. You're not going back or undeveloping, so to speak, or developing later certain things. Everything kind of happens in an order. The second principle is that development is gradual and continuous, that it happens over the course of your life, step by step. The third principle is that all development is interrelated. So those areas that we talked about, like physical, cognitive, and social emotional, all relate to each other and affect each other's development. And then the last principle of development is that development is individualized. It varies from person to person. So while these principles are usually generalized to most people, they also acknowledge that development is based on an individual basis. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the actual theories of development. There are two schools of thought when it comes to the early discussion of development around the 1700s, which is about the time that the Renaissance begins. The first school of thought is hereditary genetics and nature. Basically, the belief that humans inherently have behaviors and personality traits that come with them when they are born. The big speaker behind this movement is called G.W. Leibniz. And he is quoted as saying that the soul inherently contains the sources of various notions and doctrines which external objects merely rouse up. And this whole movement is called internalists. They basically believe that stuff came with us when we were born. On the other side of the table, you have environment or nurture. And this is basically the belief that we are formed by our experiences after we are born, that we don't bring anything or start with anything. We are formed by our own experiences. And the biggest speaker in this movement is John Locke, who we've already talked about in another video. And he talks about the tabula rasa, blank slate theory, meaning that we come with absolutely nothing and all the external forces affect our personality and behaviors. This school of thought is called the empiricist, and this eventually leads to what is known as behaviorism in developmental theory. So let's continue on with behaviorism. In our first theory comes from an experiment of Pavlov and classical conditioning in 1890 to 1930. Pavlov was a dog who would react to certain stimuli that his owner gave him. So based off of Pavlov's experiment, they came up with classical conditioning, which basically means that behaviors can be associated with responses, trained and untrained. So in the example of Pavlov, every time his owner rung a bell, he gave him food. So when he rung the bell again, Pavlov would salivate, waiting for the food to come. This can also happen in humans. We see people who listen to a song during a positive experience, and then they associate that song with that positive experience. Or the first time you eat a certain food and you get sick, you actually associate getting sick with eating that food, and you'll lose a taste for that food. All right, now we're gonna switch gears from classical conditioning to another developmental theorist called Abraham Maslow, who came up with the hierarchy of needs in the 1930s and 40s. Abraham Maslow basically perceived that there were certain needs that needed to be met for each human to attain self-actualization. The hierarchy of needs starts with the physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, self-esteem, and then self-actualization. In order for self-actualization to occur, someone needed to have all of their basic and psychological needs met before they could attain the highest level. All right, continuing on to the conditioning side, we have B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning. So Skinner was in the same school of thought as Pavlov's experiment, but he believed that humans could be conditioned to hold certain behaviors based on positive and negative reinforcement. He also believed that learning happens when behavior changes, is when somebody learns, is when their behavior changes. And through this positive and negative reinforcement, they found that people could actually change their own behavior. All right, moving right along to Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory in the 1950s. We're going to go ahead and move back again over here. And Albert Bandura was under the belief that people were not dogs. Pretty crazy thought. But he believed that Pavlov's experiment was pretty flawed because you couldn't say that all people would react to certain stimuli or even certain positive or negative reinforcements. He said that people often imitate behaviors regardless of the reinforcement they receive, and human behavior is based on perceptions, thoughts, and motivations. And I know I'm like right in the middle here, so I'm just gonna go ahead and move myself over. Yeah, that's Albert Bandura. Social cognitive theory, that we are aware of our behaviors and we usually present behaviors based on our own beliefs, motivations, and thoughts. All right, moving right along to, we're skipping a little bit ahead to Lawrence Kohlberg's moral development stages in the 1950s. And Lawrence Kohlberg was of the same mind as the other theorists in the sense that he believed that certain development happened in stages. And he starts off his moral development theory with 3 separate stages of moral development. Young children have what is known as pre-conventional morality, meaning that it's right or wrong, yes or no, black or white, based on their negative or positive reinforcements in their environment or what they're told by their parents. Teens and young adults develop a conventional morality, and this conventional morality is based more on observations of other behavior in the world, on social behavior and in society. And then adults develop a post-conventional morality, which is basically based on injustices or personal consciousness of certain morals and decisions. All right, continuing on, we have Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development. So we have Kohlberg's early moral stages of development, but now we're getting into a more structured type of cognitive development. Jean Piaget in the 1960s and 70s came up with the 4 stages of cognitive development. The first starts with sensory motor, which is the age from birth to 2 years old, where children are learning through their senses. He went into the next stage, which is pre-operational, 2 to 7 years, and this is when children start using languages, being able to recognize symbols, and actually learning what and taking in information that they learn. And the third stage is concrete operational, 7 to 11 years old. This is where children are starting to learn logically or make generalizations and problem solve. And then the last stage is formal operational. This is 11 years and older, and this is where children can start to develop logical and abstract thinking, making predictions based on their own knowledge. And a lot of these theorists actually continue to use Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development to build their own theories on development, which is when we're going to get into Jerome Bruner's theory of constructivism. So Jerome Bruner in the 1980s came up with constructivism, which basically means that learning happens best when it's in context, when students can interact and be active with what they're learning. Teachers should be cognizant of student challenges, and basically teachers should know how much a student has developed in a certain area and how to help them. He was also a promoter of the Socratic method, which we just talked about in another video with our guy Socrates. All right, the next up we have Vygotsky's sociocultural theory in the 1980s. And he challenged Piaget's theory, but not in the way that he necessarily meant to change the stages of development. It was more about that people were social beings and thinking developed through interactions with others, not just with our peers, but with adults and members of our family to learn certain things. And then we have Erikson's psychosocial developmental stages. So piggybacking off of the earlier stages in the 1970s to the 1980s, Erikson comes up with a more defined stage for developmental psychosocial interactions, meaning stuff having to do with what we think about our psychology as well as interacting with others. At infancy, we are struggling with trust versus mistrust. When we're a toddler, we struggle with autonomy versus shame. Early childhood is about initiative versus guilt. Middle childhood, industry versus inferiority. Adolescence, identity versus role confusion. Young adult, intimacy versus isolation. Middle adult, generativity versus self-absorption. And older adult, integrity versus despair. Erikson went on a little bit further than what Piaget did in his stages to include certain aspects of development that happens in older stages of our lives. All right, we're moving on. We're getting real close to our last little bit, and we're talking about David Kolb's experiential learning, which was really popular recently from the 1980s to the present. David Kolb came up with the idea that basically experience is how we learn. We learn through our experiences. He created a cycle of learning. Starts with concrete experience or a feeling, and then diverging from that feeling or observing and reflecting on what the experience was, thinking and then watching, abstractly conceptualizing that experience, and then converging into doing something, doing another experimentation or experience similar to continue the cycle of experiential learning. And that's it. That brings us to the end of our theories on development. I hope you like this video. If you like these videos, please consider subscribing or leave a comment down below. If you have questions, I will be happy to answer them. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in class. Bye!